Well, welcome everybody to the Power Lunch. I think we have a very interesting show for us today. It's something that's a little bit of a departure for us from usual because we kind of in the past have talked about hardware, gear, and new technology and those things. Well, this one I think is interesting because it is a question. It is something that I encounter a lot. And this question that people have, and I think this is a good kind of a one-on-one session, and that is talking about SQL. And we have a resident SQL expert, Tim Plas. So Tim, why don't you take a couple minutes and tell us a little bit about who you are, your experience, and what you know about SQL. And I know, do you have a presentation for today or?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd just
Yep.
throw up a slide thing here, slide deck.
Make sure, yep. And I've given control so you can put it up when you want. But yeah, tell us a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your background, and then just dive right into the deck you got.
Okay, and I'm also probably going to drop my video at this point because I live out here in frontier land, literally frontier communications, so DSL and whatnot. So I'll go to the slide thing instead of my video here. So
I thought of the name Celebration.
Oh,
Celebration, okay. Florida, and then there's a Celebration development in north of St. Cloud, Sartell, Minnesota.
Ah.
And they kind of have the same thing going where all the houses are built to a certain theme and all the entrances are to the back of the house, for example, and kind of a 1950s Disney style, kind of an interesting deal. But Celebration, Florida and Celebration, Minnesota, two communities that are same name, which kind of threw me for a loop.
Okay, yeah.
All right. Well, we had her for a minute. That was, we had to slide up.
Yeah, trying to get the right screen, too many screens here. So let's see if I can get the one that I really want.
It's lovely working with technology.
Yeah.
But I just like you can never have a truck that's too big. You can never have too many screens.
Yep, for sure. Let's see if I can move this screen over there. Yeah,
there we go.
Okay, there we go. I'm much more used to Teams rather than Zoom. So my apologies on that. Let's see if I can get this going, and let's minimize that up here. There we go. Okay. And that thing went over to the other screen again. Dang it. Well, I'll probably just work with this.
You can just work with this one. That's fine.
So, basically, as I was just talking a little bit earlier, I'm semi-retired for still trying to figure out what that means, but been doing IT for many years. Biggest thing for this purpose, I've done a lot of mostly in data center side, mostly Microsoft stuff. But the biggest thing in terms of this talk is that I've been doing SQL basically since the last quarter of a century. So what we're talking about today is really kind of focused on things for the non-DBA stuff that I've learned along the way and have needed to explain to folks occasionally from time to time. People sometimes talk about the accidental DBA. You get I installed this app from the vendor and it needed SQL. Aha, you're the DBA, or the closest we got to it. So that's kind of where that happens sometimes. But the big thing I try and tell people is that SQL management, it really isn't rocket science. It's it's got some unique little gotchas and nuances, but it's just a few things you got to learn about. It's not major heavy duty rocket science kind of stuff. So the biggest thing is that data is really what it's all about. My thing about it is that if you lose services for a while, if you're down for an hour or down for some period of time, okay, people will forgive you. They won't even remember it a year from now. But boy, if you ever lose their data and can't get it back, that's basic resume generating event. protecting the data is really what it's all about, which really means backups. So, and people would tell you, a lot of people would say that there really isn't any such thing as backups. Restores are all that really, really matter. Do you know for a fact that you can take your backups and get your system back online? So that's a real big thing. One thing about backups is, excuse me, is that malware like ransomware, SQL inherently is kind of protected from some of that because the main database files are locked while it's up and running. So nobody can get in there and change those files. They can't encrypt it out from under you while it's running. But still, I think it's a matter of time until the ransomware people figure that out and go in by way of SQL, since they got the permissions anyway, and tell SQL to start messing with the data. So backups are still important. There's a difference between a native SQL and server level backups. Server level backups from all your backup exec or any of those type of tools do a nice job of getting a copy of the SQL Server, including all of the database files, and those are useful. But I would say probably a huge percentage of DBAs will tell you still need your native SQL backups rather than just the tool from the server level. And in fact, there are some cases, or one case in particular I'll talk about here real shortly about that, where you really need the native SQL backup. There are really several different types. There's full backup and differential backups. Very often people do a full backup at once a week, and or if things are small enough, that most typically is probably just do full backups every night. But if you got really big database, then maybe a full backup at on the weekend, and differentials for each day to catch up to anything that's been changed since that full backup. And then you have something called log backups, transactional log backups, that people ask, can I do incremental backups? Well, sort of, kind of, but log backups are a way of keeping track of what's changed since the last major full or diff backup. And then one other big thing about backups is the destination. Are you getting copy of the stuff off of the same disk where the database files actually live, or even bigger, especially for ransomware and such, are you getting copies off premises? So one thing I like to do is set up a SQL Server lets you back up directly into an Azure storage blob. You can set up an Azure account that has nothing but storage account in it, set up a connection with SQL that with just enough permissions to write into Azure to write there, but not to update or delete or anything. And you can tell it to do your backups there. And then Azure has a nice little feature in the storage blob storage accounts called lifecycle management, where you can tell it I want to keep my backups around for X number of days, or the ones that have this suffix I want to keep for X number of months, or whatever the cycles are. So you can set up something pretty nice there with backups that just automatically get dropped off site. They're not touchable by anything else, except if somebody has the full permissions off in Azure, which is a whole other place, a whole other set of credentials, and you can manage their retention and such. So that's one of my favorite ways to do backups for SQL databases. Best way to do those is using SQL Agent Jobs, where you can do it's got its own built-in scheduler that can run backups on whatever cycles you want, run other tools. And by the way, if anybody has questions along the way here, please do jump in. So I should have mentioned that. In terms of backups, far and away the best way that I can recommend is somebody called Ola Hollengren. wrote a set of utilities that is used by just huge number of people out there. I'm talking Fortune 5 on down, that people depend on this. It is the most mainstream way to do backups in SQL Server. So you can schedule those with SQL Agent Jobs. You should be doing database integrity checks. Database corruption is actually really rare in SQL Server, but if it ever does happen, it's really terrible, because you can have, say, a disk controller, RAID controller glitch, or maybe a timing bug in a disk driver utility or part of the operating system. Various quirky things. Again, extremely rare, but if you're going along merrily that I've been doing my backups every day, whatever, and then you find out 6 months later that, yeah, I've been backing up corrupted data the whole time and I'll never get the stuff back because I don't have backups from before that. So there's something called database integrity checks. Again, something scheduled with all the Hollingren stuff that I recommend have those things run every night. Usually won't tell you anything. Usually it'll chew up a bunch of CPU on you, but if it's overnight, who cares?
Jim, don't talk about that corruption stuff like that. It's going to give me nightmares. I'm not even going to sleep tonight talking about that stuff. That's the kind of stuff that makes my toes sweat when I'm trying to go to sleep.
Yeah, like I say, in the quarter century or whatever I've been doing SQL, I probably only encountered it, maybe 3 or 4 times ever, but it can happen, and you should be checking for it just to make sure it didn't happen to you. So, it's worth setting up those jobs. And then there's another type of job that you can schedule for automated maintenance, basically for performance reasons, to rebuild the indexes or reorganize the SQL indexes so it can find things quicker. And then it's got something called SQL statistics, which is really some internal kind of histogram stuff. It keeps track of how the data is distributed through the database tables. And that lets the database optimizer engine, the query optimizer engine, figure out how it can quickest get at the data that you're requesting. So if it's got good statistics, it can do a good job of that. If the statistics haven't been updated for a long time, it's just going to have to make a guess that, well, I think this is probably the best way to get at it. So in terms of recommendations, probably index maintenance, maybe once a week. Statistics, do it every night if you possibly can. And sometimes people even have to do it more often if they're doing a lot of changes into a database.
So Tim, if you're in an environment where you're using SQL and it's not something that's just going to sit there and idle, right? I mean, the concept of doing maintenance on your SQL databases is an important one to have, right? Because every once in a while when I'm talking to people, they just aren't doing any maintenance on their databases, and that kind of is something that draws pause for me a little bit. So is that, I mean, just to reaffirm one of my own thoughts, that's a bad thing, right?
Oh, absolutely. That if you care about performance in your SQL Server, you should be doing that kind of database maintenance. So yeah, that's a pretty key thing. And that gets into this next thing I want to talk about a little bit is just basic care and feeding that well, this one probably fits one of those, 83.67% of all statistics are made up. I don't know if it's 98% or whatever, but really huge percentage of SQL issues performance-wise really come down to the application. That's typically not an area that most sysadmins deal with. I don't even typically try to do performance tuning because that gets so heavy into the application side of things. But it's still possible to have certain configuration things that can be set wrong from the beginning or changed along the way. So
Tim, if I can just make a comment here.
Yeah.
To your point on item number 2 there, used to run a network for a financial company, and my knowledge of SQL is minuscule. But the DBs, or one in particular, was installing enterprise version on everything. And we had an environment was just filled with enterprise inversions, which is very expensive. And it was very difficult for us to, in a relatively quick way, back all that out.
Yep, absolutely. And in fact, I talked a little bit about that in one of these upcoming.
Sorry about that.
Here. So yeah, it's possible to, there are certain mistakes that you can make with SQL. Typically, though, it's, by just making wrong choices. In general, if you, we used to laugh at people that would, oh, great, they installed the SQL Server by doing next, all, just clicking next all the way through it. It turns out nowadays, over the years, Microsoft has really improved that. That's typically about the best configured SQL Server you can have, is if you use most of their defaults are pretty solid. There's still a few things that might be worthwhile to check into. There's a number of SQL build checklists out there on the internet. Google for those, ping me if you want to. If you're building a new SQL Server, there's a handful of things that really matter. But again, most of it is, defaults are pretty good. SQL Server overall, once it's up and running, is mostly set and forget. It's the tuning, self-tuning stuff is really good. Again, if you do like the, that optimizer or the SQL statistics updating and such, the optimizer can figure out things pretty well. And it does a nice job. If you're doing Best Buy or Target or whatever, Black Friday, oh yeah, you're going to need to do some tuning and tweaking. But for the most part, most of what SQL needs, it can take pretty good care of itself. One thing I would point out for care and feeding, though, is getting the service updates on there fairly often. People used to wait, okay, I'm just going to wait for the next service pack. Well, guess what? Microsoft doesn't do service packs anymore on SQL Server, starting with 2017 version. So it's all in terms of what is called cumulative updates. And those are coming out, what I said almost monthly there, but it's in terms of, once a new version of SQL has been released, initially released, they do CUs about monthly, and then they kind of back down about once a quarter, and then it probably gets even less frequent than that once the thing's been out there for a while. But when they do come out, it's important to have them. They are really fixing some major performance issues sometimes that they found out that certain conditions perform much better if they've done this inside the thing. So, or even adding new features and functionality with new cumulative updates. And of course, the biggest thing is security. There are security patches that come out. You should be updating your SQL Server just as much as you do your Chrome browser, your Adobe Acrobat, all of those kind of apps. SQL is just as, needs that just as much. So next thing I want to talk about is, let's see. Oh, I hit the wrong one. Here. Oh, there we go. Touchy mouse here. That memory issue that probably sometimes see from relatively new system admins a lot of times is, they'll install a monitoring tool and, oh my God, the SQL Server is using up all its memory. Yeah, it's supposed to. So, SQL really is all about RAM to get its work done. Out of the things that determine performance, networking I've almost never ever seen make a difference in SQL performance. CPUs, yeah, if you've got huge number of things hitting it all at the same time, it can need a lot of CPUs sometimes. But disk, yeah, if you have bad latency on your disk, yeah, you can get some performance issues. But in general, I'd say if it's hitting disk a lot, that probably means you don't have enough RAM on it. So RAM is really what drives SQL for its performance. But all of that said, there's still a certain throttling you should put in place. I've seen system too many times where it gets into a state where mouse clicks will take like literally a minute or so to register to do anything on the server. a lot of times it's because SQL has taken all of the memory, and then somebody fired off, say, a multi-gigabyte copy on that same server, in or out of the server, and they're fighting with each other. You really need to set something called the maximum memory setting that tells SQL you should only use up to X amount and leave all the rest for the operating system and the other pieces of SQL and such. So, and it's really, really important if you've got a SQL Server on a box with other applications. Microsoft typically recommends keeping it down to dedicating the SQL database engine to be the only thing on the box, but a lot of times people have to run other things there. You really need to pay attention to the maximum memory, and just a real rough ballpark. I mean, you might be talking about leaving a quarter of the memory for other things. So you might end up with a SQL Server that's 16 gig RAM, and maybe you're going to give 12 gig of that to SQL Server, and the rest for letting the rest of the machine run. There's a much more fine-grained formula to figure that out. I used to know the formula, but hey, we got computers for that stuff. And so there's a really nice tool that just it's one of the first things I do after I set up a new server is, okay, how much RAM is on here? Well, actually, I only need that because it's that smart that it'll just go in there and figure out a RAM and or figure out the maximum memory setting and set it for you according to best practices. You might need to adjust it again if you got other apps on there, but it's a really good starting point. Next thing is probably the biggest thing that non-DBAs run into if they're work on SQL is, my disk drive filled up from the SQL Server. What caused that? And basically amounts to logs, transaction logs. And just to make a real quick distinction, there are different types of logs. There's text-based logs where it keeps really good information about troubleshooting and what SQL has been doing along the way. So those are nice to have. Some people go in and let's delete everything. It's .log. It's not going to do you that much good for disk filled up. It's the tran logs, the LDF files. Every database has an MDF and an LDF file, and the LDF files are where it keeps track of the transactions as they're happening. SQL Server is real much about transaction-based stuff. The classic example is a bank account. I'm going to transfer $100 from my savings account to my checking account. That gets halfway through and the server goes down. That'd be a terrible thing to have half of that transaction have been done. So SQL Server is really what they call atomic transactions, that it's all or nothing. And the way that that's done is with transaction logs, where it keeps track of how far this thing has been done. Is it all done? So then you can get into how much of that stuff you're going to keep around. RTO, you've heard of recovery time objective, recovery point objectives. First one is how long it's going to take to restore it. Basically, what sort of agreement have I made with my management that it's going to take me 1 hour or 4 hours or 24 hours that I can have your server up and running again. That's RTO. But RPO is what's related to the tran logs here. That relates to how much data you can afford to lose. Okay, I get my server back up, but how much of the data might, if the disk drives went away or whatever, how much data am I going to lose? The last 5 seconds before the crash, the last hour, the last day, how much can you really expect to have back when you come up? And of course, people will tell you, I want it all. Sure, that'll be a mere $120,000 and this and that, or maybe daily backups are good enough is what you sometimes find. So it's a conversation that needs to be had, but to implement it, you get into something called the recovery models. Every database can be set for either simple or full recovery model. simple means I'm only going to keep the transaction data around long enough to make sure that it's totally committed. You know, the end of the transactions happen. After that, okay, my tran log space can be reused and it's not going to grow very much. The full recovery model says, I'm going to keep this transaction data around until you tell me otherwise. And the way you free up space is by doing a SQL native backups of your transaction log. But so many times I see people that have turned on full recovery model, they're not doing any form of transaction log backups, and that tran log file just keeps growing and growing and growing and eventually fills it up. You know, if you're going to depend on your daily backups, then you should be in simple model. If you really want that, you know, down to the second recovery and such, then if you need full recovery model, then you need to be doing the tran log backups. So let's see, I had something else. Yeah. And then, okay, let's move on to another one. I mentioned licensing is a thing. A couple big things there is, you know, versions or additions. Versions is what you can, you know, SQL 2019 or whatever version. Two real big things to mention there is that if people aren't aware, SQL 2022 has already been announced, probably be arriving within the next 6 months or thereabouts. So, you know, that's going to be, you know, probably a consideration to start installing at that level. And some of the older versions are going to be rolling off for support and such. But another thing is that very often, you get an application vendor that says, I'm only going to support SQL Server up through 2016 version or whatever. Yeah, they're running that all the time. But all I can typically buy out there on the market that I can get licenses for is right now SQL 2019. The thing is, you can buy a 2019 license, but install it any older version, and that's perfectly fine within the licensing. Obviously, you're not going to be able to install 2022 with your 2019 license, but you can go the other way. Addition-wise, there's several of them that are most important. There's a couple others that are, you know, pretty rare actually, but there's Express edition that of SQL. It's a free tool that, but it does have limits. It only allows so much RAM, only allows so big a databases, and most importantly, it doesn't have a SQL agent with it, so it can't do any of that scheduled kind of stuff for you. So you might need to do things a little bit differently on that if you got a copy of Express. Standard is the one that most of us run into. Enterprise, yeah, people call it expensive Enterprise edition or expensive edition. It's really about performance and availability features inside it. It used to be that certain programmability features were only available in Enterprise and not in Standard, but now it's pretty much anything that you can do on it, you can do with Standard in terms of, you know, the programming and such. But there are a few things that are different between Enterprise and Standard, and that's where people sometimes get into trouble with a developer edition. Developer edition is really cool. You know, $50 per license. You can run, you know, $50 per SQL instance, and you know, it's quite cheap way to get SQL running for development usage. The thing that a lot of people aren't typically aware of is the way it's licensed. Is that the only people technically allowed to use it are people that have MSDN or Virtual Studio or Visual Studio licenses. And then end users can access apps that are on it, you know, for testing purposes, but, you know, to actually use the SQL, you have to have one of those type of licenses. And then the other thing is that some people complain sometimes that a developer contains all of the features of SQL. So they might, your programmers develop something that uses some feature, they go to install it on their SQL standard production machine. Oh no, that was an enterprise feature that you were using over there in developer. So just something to watch out for a little bit. And then licensing itself is, there's a couple different models. Some people try to get by with a server plus Cal thing, where you buy, what is it, $900 or whatever it is for the server side, and then $200 or whatever per user that's actually accessing the SQL Server. But what people don't realize in that model, and I've seen them get burned badly on software audits, is that if you're running an app on that server and the app is serving 25 or 100 users or whatever, all of those users would need to be licensed with Cal licenses. You reach that break-even point really quickly, where it's cheaper to just license it per core and just forget about the individual number of users. So that's the Cal thing actually can work either by user or by device, and people try and play games there, but I've just always said it's just not worth it. I've seen people get burned too badly in audits. So
it's painful. If you get burned in the audit, it's painful, man. I've experienced it in a past life. I inherited one that was not properly licensed.
Oh, I see.
Oh my gosh.
I've literally seen multi-million-dollar settlements on that stuff.
Yeah, that's what this started off as, and I was able to negotiate, but it was, dude, it was painful. It was bad.
Yeah, painful is exactly the word. Licensing, do it per core. It's a minimum of 4 cores are licensed per server. So even if you're running on a 2-core server, you're going to be paying for 4 cores anyway of licensing. That's where it gets to be the expensive edition, because enterprise is like $7,000 per core, minimum of 4 cores. So you put it on a 32-core machine or something, you're going to be well up there. But I see people doing that, and they buy these SQL licenses, and then they put it on some just real hobbled. We're only going to give it 16 gig of RAM or whatever, and the performance just goes to crap, and the cost that they're paying versus the basically pretty cheap cost of hardware these days. So it's definitely worth looking at. One other quick thing about licensing is that Microsoft does have an exception for standby servers, but you have to pay some good attention. Again, talk to your licensing provider. Do you have the right kind of licensing to support the standby? Let's see. And then the whole rest of this, I want to just talk about some tools typically used with SQL Server. Biggest one, or most common one that people encounter, is SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio. It's the GUI where if a vendor asks you, hey, copy and paste this T-SQL query over there and run it, you're going to be doing it almost always in SQL Management Studio. It used to come out with every new version of SQL, so you'd have a SSMS for 2012 or 2014 or whatever. Now it's an independent product. Gets updated pretty frequently, and you should keep it up to date if you're running it. Best practice for running it, however, a lot of people just put it right on the SQL Server itself. It's actually a really heavy resource pig, it's basically running a copy of Virtual Studio when you fire it up interactively. So, best practice is run your SQL Management Studio on some separate system, whether it's your workstation, whether it's a jump station, or just kind of a management station you've got in the environment. Put it there. Just tell it to and when you fire up SSMS, you have to tell it which server you're connecting to anyway, whether it's on the box or not. So just tell it to go over to where your actual server is, and do all your queries and everything from over there. However, I still do, excuse me, I still do recommend putting a copy of SSMS on the SQL Server itself. Sometimes you have an emergency, and it's just easier, quicker to get things back if you can do it right there. What you'll find is you probably haven't been keeping that copy as up to date as all the rest they should have been. Which is usually pretty much okay. But, and then the other thing is, if you keep it up to date on the server, you'll find that SSMS new versions, new updates that come out just really randomly. Nobody's figured out the pattern. Sometimes it'll make you reboot the box, sometimes it won't. So, again, a good reason not to run SSMS on the main server, or at least to, depend on that as your main copy. The other thing about SSMS is that it's free. You can install it absolutely anywhere. So as many copies as you want, all the developers' workstations, any servers you want it on, whatever. So next.
Tim, let me ask you a quick question here, and I just want to make sure that I asked the question before we would possibly run out of time. But up above, you mentioned that, what is it, Olga Hammerhand tool? What was it called?
Ola Hollengren. That's one of my upcoming slides here.
Oh, okay. Let's cover it in that one. Then I just wanted to make sure that if it's a download or something, that people can see where to get that.
Yeah, and I may not have put the link here, but I mean, you Google on Ola Hollengren the way it's spelled here, and you will get it.
It doesn't really flow off the tongue super easy, but yeah.
No, but very, very common. So, another tool that actually gets installed as part of every SQL Server install is a SQL Configuration Manager, and it's pretty rarely used actually. Once in a while, you need to do something quirky. But there is one case where you absolutely, utterly must and should use this thing. And that's, the scenario often goes where, okay, I'm trying to get my SQL Server to access some resource out on the network, like a file share on a file server. Oh, geez, the SQL Server service account doesn't have permissions to get to that file share. Okay, let's run SQL Server under a domain account that does have permissions. So we go into the Windows Services control panel, change the service account on that service, and my SQL Server doesn't start anymore. So that can happen to you. The only way you should ever change the service account on a SQL Server is with this tool, SQL Configuration Manager. The main reason is because there's a whole bunch of underlying permissions, especially that out on various disk folders and registry keys, everything else. If you change the service account with this tool, it'll go make all those changes for you. If you do it with just a Windows Services control panel, all the changes is just that account. So one quick tip, if you ever do break a SQL Server that way, easiest way is to bring up this SQL Configuration Manager, change the service account to some whatever account, and then change it back to what you really want it to go to. And the fact that you're using this tool means that it's going to make all those changes for you. So that's a thing that a lot of people don't realize, and you can really break a SQL Server. Next couple things are in terms of tools. I actually will never install a SQL Server for the last number of years without installing this tool alongside it, called DBA Tools. It's keeps growing and growing. It's community supported. It's totally open source. Last count is way over 500 commands in it. Basically what it amounts to is it's a PowerShell way of managing SQL. I tried really, really hard for the last number of years not to even learn or remember any T-SQL commands because I can use PowerShell, and these guys have commands to do just almost anything out there that needs doing on a SQL Server for admin purposes. Obviously, if you're doing development, you're gonna need T-SQL, but if you're administering a SQL Server, I can do it with PowerShell almost always with this tool set. And again, in terms of where you should have it, probably anywhere that you put SSMS, you should put DBA Tools. That URL has one page that tells you how to install it. They're very, very straightforward. And I mentioned earlier on that, that thing about the formula for max memory. This tool has this, oops, I guess I missed a dash in there, set dash max mem, but that just has the stuff built in for you. So it does all the calculations, it'll set the thing and click, you're done.
This is a downloadable tool package that off of that URL.
Yep, absolutely.
Wow, cool.
And any SQL Server you've got out there, I highly recommend putting this tool into that environment. PowerShell, you just and then it's got a really nice, what's the one page on there, commands, commands.dbatools.io or whatever. And that, has a real nice organization of what all the commands do. You can go in there and find what you're looking for, get help on it, either from the website or with regular PowerShell, get help command. So it's the way to administer SQL as far as I'm concerned. And then finally, there's let's see, I think I've got it right here. I'm just going. It's just not simple, but again, Google will find it for you quite readily. Anyway, DBA Tools, once you've got that on there, you can use it to install a lot of these community tools. The Ola Holmgren thing in particular, like I say, just absolutely, you should be using that for your backups, for database integrity checks, for your index and statistics updating. Ola has all the stuff. Defaults that he's got set up are pretty dang good. The only thing you have to do when you install it is go into the jobs that it creates in SQL Agent and put in the times that you want those things to run. So that's probably the only bit that you need to do there. A couple other tools that are nice to have that you can also install from DBA Tools, or directly, of course, but Brent Ozar wrote something called the First Responder Kit. It's got some nice tools that give you a nice quick examination of SQL Server. Are there one case in particular I mentioned, the Tranlog growth issue. This has a little rule in there. Do I have any databases where the Tranlog file is bigger than the actual database file? If so, it's probably a pretty good indication that you've got this growth issue. So it does those kind of checks for you. Someone named Adam Mechanic wrote something called SV Who is Active. Very good if you need to, which SQL process right now is tying the thing in knots. What resources is it using? It's a good tool there. And then finally, if you're doing SQL monitoring or want to do monitoring, somebody's written something called SQL Watch that does decentralized monitoring of all your SQL servers, and then it has its own built-in freely distributable Power BI dashboard to go look at the things that it's finding. So that's what's there.
Are those all free tools that you can go out and access, Tim?
Yep, absolutely. Every one of those.
Very cool. Very cool. I actually, while you're talking, took a screenshot of your tool menu so I can share that with a couple people I know.
Yep, and I can actually share this deck as well as it being on the recording too. So
yeah, no, having those links is super helpful. And so like I said, I stole a screenshot of that because as you're talking, I'm going, oh, this person needs this, oh, this person needs that. So
yep, there's some good stuff in there.
Very good. Does anybody have any questions for Tim? I can't even formulate my questions at this point. My head is swirling, but if anybody has any questions, now's the time to feel free to ask. If not, I have a couple of questions for you, Tim, and just in general. All right. So actually, while you were talking, one of the things that occurred to me is when we were talking about SQL Express, what is the difference between the free version of SQL and actually I'll say it this way. What's the difference between SQL Express and MySQL?
Well, SQL Express is a full-fledged copy of SQL Server. Microsoft SQL Server is the same engine underneath, does all the same query optimization thing when it runs queries and such. But MySQL is basically a different database engine. There's the Maria database. Let's see, what's the other flavor kind of like that? That one got bought.
What about Postgres?
Postgres is yet another one. And, in my mind, those, if you're basically just, trying to do a relational database system to support an app, and you want to build it on one or the other, they all do a pretty good job of that. However, when it gets into, is it something I want to do BI analytics tools against? Some of those kind of, if you want to do more with it, you're going to find, I think, that the SQL Server, regarding whether it's Express or Center or whatever, you're going to find that it's maybe more mainstream in terms of the tools out there, the people that know it, those kind of things.
I had a past life where Postgres was the database of choice for the app that we were using, and like you said, holy moly, that was not mainstream. Trying to find help with that was the challenge. But
that came from the Linux world, that's
right.
It's supported pretty much everywhere nowadays, but it's still, how do you support it?
How do you support it? And it's finding talent to support you with. It's all great when you get it figured out, but when that person leaves or has something happen, trying to find support for something like that is akin to finding, Bigfoot riding a unicorn. So it's like it's very rare, not easy to find. I guess the other thing, like when we think about Express and when we think about MySQL and kind of the whole licensing discussion, because I think you hit the nail on the head with the enterprise being expensive, and then you get into the whole question of nobody really knows how to Microsoft license things. People try to go to the free versions, and it never seems to work the same when you talk about like Express or MySQL. And have you ever run into that before, if someone's trying to jam the square peg into the round hole with the free versus pay versions of things?
Oh yeah, cutting corners. Obviously, licensing is where they can get really burned doing that. But just functionality wise, sure, I can install Express Edition. I think limits again. It only lets you run on a single CPU core. It lets you only go up to is it 1 gig of RAM nowadays, and it only lets you.
That's not a lot.
Have a database that's up to 10 gigs in size. So it's got limitations, and maybe that works for people in those limitations, but it's still, and then I've had this thing running there, but I've got no way to do regular backups on it because it doesn't have the SQL Agent feature to run the scheduled stuff. So yeah, SQL Express, definitely. And it's a really good tool for it that vendors tend to embed in their apps. And if they're providing the tools for the backups and such, and even the database maintenance,
that was kind of my next question, is there a place for those tools? I mean, probably not in a big production environment, but
it definitely has a place. One real good example is IoT kind of stuff. If you're going to put small SQL servers out on the edges in places, SQL Express is a great way to collect data and then periodically replicate it up to the central thing or whatever. Oh, very nice fit. Other places, I can see its usage, but again, for your main SQL server to run your business, Express probably isn't the place you want to be.
Right. Does anybody else have any questions for Tim? I could probably ask him questions all day.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to reach out to you offline. I have some questions for you offline that I need to ask you, but for the purposes of our show here today, very good information. I like the tools piece of it. Yeah, if you are open to like sending that slide or emailing that slide to me, I do have some people I'd like to share those tools with.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that, and just because I know that there are people who are using SQL, and I'm not a SQL guy. It's not that I don't like SQL. I just am not a DBA. And I would just like to see if they have those tools available to them, because if you're excited about them, I'm excited about them.
They're worth a little bit of time.
They must be good if you are interested in them.
And especially DBA tools, that thing is just made a night and day difference in administering SQL Server over the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing is, and if you're, I mean, are those tools okay? I shouldn't say okay to use, but if somebody isn't a classically trained DBA and they're kind of in their role, they're being forced to kind of tap around in the dark with a cane and figure out where they're at. Are those tools okay to use, or do they just make you dangerous enough to cause catastrophe? Because I've experienced those types of things too.
I don't think it's any different than turning them loose with SSMS.
Right.
You can go tweak in the GUI and do some damage, but
Right.
so yeah, you have to have a little bit of sense about it. But if you know what you need done, it is just like the way to get it done.
Right. So I see that you put your contact information in the chat. So if anybody had questions for you, or they wanted to talk to you more about something, they could go ahead and use that information. That's okay with you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I got my email, Twitter, and LinkedIn contact stuff.
All right, very good. Piper, are we going to do the Wheel of Fun and Happiness today?
Yes, I'm so ready. I've been waiting for it for the end of the episode today because we have so many people. This is the biggest wheel we've had so far.
Yeah, this will be exciting.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
So,
All right.
So we're spinning for a sandwich, right?
Yes, $10 off of a
it's hard to find any place where you can win something as awesome as a sandwich.
Yeah.
Sandwiches are once you get to be my age, a sandwich becomes much more important in your life. When you can get a quality sandwich, that's a cool thing. Exactly. I would take a sandwich over a new car, actually. A sandwich from the Powerlunch is probably equal in value to winning a new car other places.
Okay.
All right. Well, without further ado,
let's go ahead and do the spin.
Can you guys see what I'm seeing?
Yep.
Yep.
Sweet. All right. Bum-ba-da-bum-ba-da-bum.
There we go.
Hey.
And Denny. Holy cow, Denny is quickly approaching Raj on his winning ways here with Powerlunch.
I was going to say, he's been winning a lot lately.
Hey, Denny was kind of the sleeper for a while. He's always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Well, the last few times, Denny's been winning. So
yeah, well, congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations. And Tim, thank you very much for your time today. Super interesting. Like I said, I feel dizzy. My head is spinning. There's a lot of good information there, and I do want to make those tools available to people who are, like I said, I can think of specific folks right off the top of my head I want to give them to. So that's awesome. It's great when we can directly connect the things that we talk about on the show to actual real world use case. So that's pretty cool. So I appreciate you providing that type of information.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and if anybody else has questions afterwards or whatever, contact me by all means. So
very good. Well, thank you very much for your time, sir. And I'm sure we'll be in touch, and you and I will get together and we'll do coffee together.
Okay.
My treat. My treat. All right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the week and take care. Bye-bye.